Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. A burned-out lawyer seeks peace at his grandfather's remote lakeside cabin, only to face a ruthless HOA that tries to steal his land with fake maps and legal threats. But they picked the wrong man. What follows is a war of silence, strategy, and sweet, cold justice. I came to the lake expecting silence, not the kind of silence where you hear a neighbor's leaf blower 3 houses down and pretend everything is fine. I'm talking real quiet, water lapping against old wood, wind slipping through pine needles, maybe a loon screaming bloody murder at 2 in the morning. The kind of silence a burned-out real estate attorney could finally breathe in. I left my suits and city brain behind and moved into my grandfather's wooden cabin by Lake Orion in northern Michigan, a place built long before anyone invented the acronym HOA. The boards creak in the winter, the roof complains when it rains, and the dock is old enough that stepping wrong could become a trustful exercise with nature. But it was mine. Well, technically it was Grandpa's, and now I was the sucker responsible for maintaining it. I spent my first days sanding down the dock and cleaning up the overgrown yard, discovering relics of the man who lived here before me. Rusty tackle boxes, a thermos with dented metal, a pocket knife still sharp enough to fillet a salmon. I sat on the end of the dock most evenings, letting the lake cool the heat in my skull, left by 10 years of legal battles over zoning disputes and property rights. Funny how a guy escapes that garbage only to find, well, you'll see. My nearest neighbors weren't technically neighbors. The development across the tree line, Lakeview Pines, looked like it had been printed out of a Live, Laugh, Love catalog. Brand new asphalt roads, street lamps that came on before the sun even thought about setting, and identical lakefront homes with tasteful beige siding and fences that screamed regulation. I figured if I didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother me. If only life worked that way. 2 weeks into my retreat, I woke up to a loud knock. Not a friendly, hey, welcome to the neighborhood knock. This one sounded like the opening chord of a death metal track. I opened the door and found a thick envelope taped sloppily at eye level. Return address printed in bold letters, Lakeview Pines Homeowners Association. My eyebrows instantly tried to flee my skull. I wasn't part of Lakeview Pines. I wasn't part of any HOA. My land existed outside their gated bubble, according to recorded maps older than most of their lawn ornaments. I tore open the envelope anyway. Inside, legal documents. A summons. I was being sued. I skimmed the first page. Allegations. Unauthorized use of private infrastructure. Benefiting from HOA amenities without contribution. Encroachment within the defined perimeters of the community. There was also a delightful accusation referring to my dock, my grandfather's dock, as community shoreline attachment. Apparently, they passed a new jurisdictional charter last month claiming my property was formally included within their boundaries. Just like that. They drew a bigger bubble and decided I now lived in it. I laughed, a sharp, short bark of disbelief. This had to be a mistake, some paperwork glitch, a rogue intern with a highlighter obsession. I sat on the porch steps rereading the pages until the absurdity turned into the uncomfortable realization that these people were dead serious. I leaned back, listening to waves slap the shore. Funny thing about peace, you recognize it only when someone tries to take it from you. I looked across the cove at those cookie-cutter houses and felt the first sting of anger in days. I came here to get away from legal hell. The universe looked down and said, cute. I folded the summons neatly, walked inside, and poured myself coffee into Grandpa's chipped mug with the slogan "Property is Freedom" printed on it. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I snorted, "Guess it's time to defend my freedom. Again." The next morning, I woke up believing the world would reset itself overnight, like a lazy Windows update. Surely the HOA would realize they had sued the wrong guy, apologize for the misunderstanding, and maybe send a casserole. Lakeview Pines looked like the kind of place where casseroles functioned as both peace offerings and passive-aggressive threats. Instead, my phone rang before I even brewed coffee. Unknown number. I should have let it ring, but old attorney instincts die hard. Mr. Manson. The voice had the warmth of a tax audit. This is Judith Harper, legal representative for Lakeview Pines Homeowners Association. We expect your compliance with community obligations within 30 business days. I closed my eyes. I don't belong to your community. Yes, you do. She sounded like she was reading a recipe. As of the updated charter, your property falls within Lakeview Pines jurisdiction. Failure to pay assessed dues results in legal action up to and including eviction and seizure. I laughed again, not out of amusement, more like a pressure release valve preventing spontaneous combustion. You can't just annex private land because you want another lakeside spot for your 4th of July boat parade. Silence on the line. Then she responded, perfectly monotone. That matter can be discussed in court. She hung up. Court. A place I left behind because staring down sociopathic real estate tyrants gets old after a decade. But apparently those tyrants had followed me to the woods. I spent the rest of the morning copying every document I had. Grandpa's deed from 1969, tax receipts, recorded maps, anything proving that this property existed outside their Stepford cult. I mailed a formal response through a notary just to sprinkle some professional spice on my politely worded "go away." 2 days later, the situation went from irritating to deranged. I returned from the hardware store, bought lumber to reinforce a few dock planks, and spotted someone crouching at my mailbox. A tall guy in a navy blazer and sunglasses, which is absolutely standard attire when you're rummaging around rural mailboxes like a raccoon with a corporate job. "Can I help you?" I called out. He jumped and spun around, smiling in a way that tried too hard. "Oh, hey, sorry, I'm your neighbor, Evan." He extended a hand and I shook it, mostly because it was forced into my personal bubble. "I live just across the tree line. Wanted to introduce myself. We've all heard about your situation." "Already?" I muttered. "Karen believes there's been a misunderstanding," he said, "and she can be intense. But I want you to know I'm on your side. HOA politics, total nightmare." His laugh sounded like wind chimes manufactured from lies. "I just came to see if you needed any help." "Yeah, sure, because strangers usually start friendships by fondling your mailbox." I humored him, made small talk, and watched him stroll back toward the immaculate houses. As soon as he disappeared, I opened the mailbox. Inside lay a second notice, this time not a lawsuit, but a list of violations. They claimed my lawn exceeded maximum allowed height, my shoreline structure lacked approved design, and, my personal favorite, my mailbox color didn't comply with community aesthetics. The mailbox was forest green. The forest behind it was also green. Apparently, camouflage equals crime. They were escalating. Later that evening, sitting on the dock, I checked the online county court system. And there it was. Lakeview Pines had already filed a new complaint. This one went further. If I didn't become a dues-paying member of the HOA and pay $18,000 in back dues, they would pursue eviction for unjust enrichment, meaning get out of your own goddamn house so Karen can turn the land into a VIP dock zone. The moon reflected on the lake, looking like a mocking grin. I came here to rebuild my life. Then an HOA tried to claim ownership of it. I let the anger settle, not as panic, but as purpose. They wanted to drag me into a courtroom. Fine. I knew exactly how to bury them in one. The first thing to go was my mailbox. One morning, I walked out with a mug of black coffee, ready to start a day filled with scraping algae off the dock and pretending I wasn't being legally hunted by a suburban militia. Instead, I found my mailbox on the ground, door twisted off like a chicken wing. The pole was snapped at the base, wood splintered with a kind of deliberate energy. No tire tracks, no debris, no accident, just destruction. Personal, but plausible deniability, the HOA specialty. I stood over it for a moment, considering whether to laugh or scream. The forest around me offered no opinion. Instead, I picked it up and set it on my porch like a war trophy. They wanted intimidation. I was fluent in it. The next day, a man in khakis and a generic windbreaker showed up at my door. "Zoning inspection," he said without blinking. "Need access to the property." "For what?" "Septic assessment. Possible shoreline impact." I raised an eyebrow. "Got ID?" He froze, just long enough to confirm my suspicion. "It's in the truck." "Great. Go get it." He hesitated, mumbled something about tight schedules, then backed off and disappeared faster than the HOA's legal ethics. I checked the plates on his dusty Ford. No municipal tags. I jotted down the number anyway. Something told me it would be useful. The following afternoon, I found new signs installed at the edge of my property, right where the land dipped toward the lake. The posts were fresh, the screws still shiny. Private HOA beach, Members only. Trespassers will be reported. I stared at them for a long time. My grandfather's dock stood behind the sign, gently swaying in the breeze like it didn't give a damn. And honestly, that dock had seniority over every man, woman, and rulebook in Lakeview Pines. I didn't rip the signs down. Not yet. No, I had something better planned. That evening, I logged onto the Lakeview Pines neighborhood forum under a burner account I created months ago when I first considered renting the property short-term. It wasn't hard to find the thread. Man living in non-HOA house uses our beach. Is he even paying taxes? Fake veteran lives on stolen land. That last one was my favorite. I've never served, never claimed to, and the closest thing I have to a uniform is a Michigan State hoodie with a mustard stain shaped like Ohio. But damn, these people were creative. Buried among the posts, I noticed several comments written in the same syntax, same grammar patterns, same misspelled words. Sock puppets. Classic online manipulation. And based on the usernames, they were all trying to drum up pressure to force me out. Manufactured outrage. I wouldn't be surprised if Karen herself was behind half of them. I started connecting the dots. The legal escalation, the phantom inspector, the mailbox, the forum. It wasn't a spontaneous HOA tantrum. It was a campaign. Coordinated, systematic, and probably not the first time they'd pulled this stunt. That's when I decided it was time to escalate. I spent the next 48 hours doing what I do best, building a file, evidence, timelines, property records. I mapped every action taken by the HOA against actual municipal data and began to see cracks. The so-called new charter wasn't officially registered through the county office. It was stamped and notarized by a private cadastral agency I'd never heard of. When I looked up the owner, I found a shell LLC based in Lansing, run by someone with a last name that matched Lakeview Pines' vice president, Cozy. I printed everything, built a timeline, attached real survey maps from the county archives that clearly showed the original boundaries from 1969. My land was never part of Lakeview Pines, never had shared roads, utilities, or drainage systems. I had my own well, my own septic. Even my trash pickup was contracted privately. The only thing I shared with those people was lake water, and even that depended on wind direction. But the crown jewel came from my newly installed surveillance cameras. I'd set them up after the mailbox incident. Solar-powered, motion-triggered, cloud-backed. Legal in Michigan, especially on private land. I reviewed the footage from the past week, and bingo. There was our so-called zoning inspector, caught snooping around the tool shed at 2 in the morning, trying the lock. Another clip showed a woman, blonde bob haircut, looked suspiciously like Karen from across the tree line, removing a boundary marker I'd placed with a county official 3 years ago. I didn't upload the videos yet. I wanted them to sweat first. Meanwhile, Evan dropped by again. Mr. Helpful claimed he was just checking in. Said Karen was hoping we could come to a peaceful resolution. Don't want this to get messier than it already is, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You ever read Kafka? I asked. He blinked. The bug guy. Close enough. He left looking puzzled. That night, I sent a registered complaint to the Michigan Board of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, attaching everything I had on the fake inspector, the bogus charter, the private surveying scam. I CC'd a local investigative reporter from the county newspaper, just for fun. And then, for dessert, I started a little rumor in the Lakeview Pines forum under my burner account. A new developer was eyeing my lot for a jet ski marina and Airbnb compound. If Karen wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd drag her into the swamp and see if she could swim. The thing about living alone in a cabin by a lake is that you get very good at hearing silence. And when silence changes, when it stiffens or hesitates, you notice. The morning after I dropped the jet ski marina rumor, the forest didn't feel like mine. The birds were quieter. The wind was too polite. Even the lake held its breath, like it was waiting for something ugly to surface. That something arrived in the form of a county zoning notice, slapped on my porch door in bright orange like a roach motel for bureaucrats. Pending environmental review, it said. Unauthorized shoreline modifications under investigation. That would have been a hell of a thing if I'd modified anything. I hadn't even restained the dock yet. I made some calls. The zoning office denied any active inspection requests. No orders filed, no one dispatched. Translation, someone forged it. I scanned the notice into my records, noting the signature and seal. Both sloppy fakes. Whoever had made it clearly didn't count on me being fluent in forged municipal paperwork. I'd once shredded a multi-million-dollar claim over a bad notary stamp. This was amateur hour. It was time to shift from defense to full-scale counteroffensive. I called Liz Vargas, a former colleague turned property law consultant. She was tough, quick, and hated HOAs more than gluten. I sent her the case file, maps, forged documents, camera footage, and the whisper campaign orchestrated through the Lakeview Pines forum. She called me within the hour, already half in love with the war we were about to wage. "Garrett," she said, "this isn't just an overreach. It's fraud, systematic, provable, and weaponized through official-looking channels. They screwed up." I figured. No, you don't get it. They used a fake licensed inspector, filed an illegal zoning claim, and tried to expand a charter without public notice or majority vote. That's not a gray area. That's a three-ring circus of criminal liability. Music to my ears. We drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to the Lakeview Pines HOA, citing malicious misrepresentation of jurisdiction, property encroachment, unauthorized zoning interference, and potential criminal conspiracy involving forged public documents. It was 27 pages of lawyer speak, so sharp it might as well have been printed on razor wire. We sent it by registered mail and emailed it directly to the HOA board, CCing not just Karen but the vice president, the treasurer, the secretary, and the HOA's pet law firm. For good measure, I also CC'd 3 local journalists, the county zoning board, and the Michigan Department of Licensing. The next day, the forum exploded. Why is Channel 8 investigating our HOA? Someone leaked confidential minutes. Karen says not to panic. That last one? Always a sign it's time to panic. But I wasn't done. I brought in a licensed cadastral surveyor, Doug Wilhelm, old school, wore suspenders like a man who'd measured land before Google Earth was a thing. We walked my property boundary inch by inch. Doug documented everything, including the original survey markers still embedded in the ground from 1969. He took photos, cross-referenced with official county topographic maps, and issued a notarized report stating, unequivocally, parcel is wholly outside Lakeview Pines Association perimeter. That same day, Evan returned. I spotted him from the porch, khakis, Patagonia fleece, smile like store-brand mayonnaise. "Hey man," he said, hands in pockets like a teenager caught smoking behind a church. Karen asked me to see if we could have a little sit-down. You know, no lawyers. I looked at him for a long beat. "You spying on me again?" His eyes darted. "What? No, man. Come on. I just think we can avoid a total meltdown here." "Meltdown? I think we're about due for one. Just the right temperature." He licked his lips. "Look, Karen's under pressure. She thinks you're going to develop the property, sell it to some out-of-state company, turn this place into a boat circus." "You mean that rumor on the forum?" I raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you hear that?" He paused, suddenly unsure if he'd stepped into a trap. People talk, man. You're sweating. It's 70 degrees. It's Michigan in May. 70 here is considered spring blizzard." He didn't laugh. I stepped forward. "Tell Karen that next time she wants to start a whisper campaign, she should check her IP address, or at least use better sock puppet grammar." He turned pale. "You tracked. I know you're not just the helpful neighbor. I also know Karen tried to pay off someone in zoning. Maybe you didn't know that part." He said nothing. "Walk away, Evan, before you drown in a lake that isn't yours." He did. That night, I uploaded the footage of the fake inspector and the sign removal to a cloud drive and shared it with Liz, who immediately forwarded it to the local media. Channel 8 requested an interview. I agreed, but only on my dock, wearing a flannel and holding Grandpa's mug that said, "Property is freedom." Let them try to crop that out. The piece aired the next evening. 10 minutes of me calmly describing how a private citizens association had tried to override land records, forge government paperwork, and threaten legal action against a man living on inherited land. I kept my tone measured, but the fire was there. Karen's name came up twice. The footage spoke for itself. Within 24 hours, the county recorder's office announced a full audit of the Lakeview Pines HOA charter amendments. The licensing board opened an investigation into the inspector, and 2 residents anonymously sent emails confirming Karen had pushed similar annexation tactics on 3 other properties over the past year. The dominoes were wobbling, but the cherry on top One of the IP addresses tied to the boat circus rumor matched the HOA board secretary's home Wi-Fi. They were eating each other now. All I had to do was keep the pressure on. So I did. The hearing was held in the Oakland County Courthouse, a brutalist brick monster from the 1970s that smelled like paper, mildew, and bitter coffee. I hadn't set foot in a courtroom in over a year, by choice. I'd left the profession to stop watching people with bad haircuts lie for a living. But here I was again, pressed into slacks I hadn't worn since my last deposition, armed with maps, notarized documents, and a mugshot of justice in my back pocket. Karen Landry arrived like she owned the building. Pencil skirt, burgundy blazer, pearl earrings. The HOA's general counsel walked 2 steps behind her like a caddy hauling a particularly poisonous set of clubs. She didn't look at me, which was smart. One glare, and I might have offered her a free dental adjustment. The judge was Honorable Linda Carroll, mid-60s, sharp eyes, no nonsense. The kind of woman who'd throw a contempt fine at God if he interrupted her docket. I liked her immediately. Karen's lawyer, a man with a voice like drywall and a name I forgot as soon as he said it, opened the case. He presented a large poster board map, laminated, color-coded, clearly fresh from the printer. Per the HOA's jurisdictional amendment, Mr. Manson's property falls within the expanded community zone established last year through internal vote and certified boundary adjustment. Judge Carroll stared over her glasses. Certified by whom? An independent surveyor contracted through a recognized private agency. Not county recognized. Well, no, Your Honor. But, continue. He pushed on, rattling off legalese so hollow it echoed, claimed I benefited from community roads. False. Lake maintenance. Irrelevant. And shared shoreline appeal. Whatever the hell that meant. Then came the gem. The HOA has attempted to resolve this matter amicably and only seeks reimbursement for shared services. How much? The judge asked. $18,475, Your Honor, in back dues and penalties. Alternatively, the HOA requests transfer of property to the association with compensation for depreciation. There it was, the land grab, fully unzipped. Thank you, Carroll said, then turned to me. Mr. Manson? I stood, adjusted my tie, and began what could best be described as the legal dismemberment of an HOA hydra. I started with the official county map, dated and filed, showing my grandfather's parcel clearly excluded from the Lakeview Pines perimeter. I walked her through the original deed, tax records, and utility contracts, none of which intersected with HOA infrastructure. Then I dropped the first bomb. The so-called jurisdictional map submitted by the HOA was filed not with the county recorder's office, but with a private agency, Willcrest Mapping Group, whose co-owner, Ben Landry, is the HOA's vice president and the brother of the plaintiff, Karen Landry. Dead silence. Karen's lawyer cleared his throat like he'd just swallowed a cactus. I continued. Furthermore, the zoning inspector who attempted to access my property was neither licensed by the county nor registered with any state agency. His credentials, I verified, were falsified, and his appearance was documented on surveillance footage at 2 a.m., attempting to tamper with personal property. I clicked a remote and played the clip on the courtroom monitor. Mr. Fake Inspector trying the lock on my shed in glorious infrared. Audible gasps from the back of the room. The signs posted on my land, private HOA beach, were placed without my consent over my survey line, which I reconfirmed last month with a licensed state-certified cadastral engineer. I presented Doug Wilhelm's notarized survey, stamped with state seal. They also removed one of my boundary markers, a felony in this state. I glanced at Karen. Her face had frozen halfway between a smile and a snarl, like Botox had tried to jump ship mid-expression. But I wasn't done. I submitted a copy of the cease and desist letter, a notarized statement from my attorney, Liz, outlining statutory violations, copies of the anonymous tips sent to the licensing board, and then the final nail, an audio recording of a phone call between Karen and the zoning official, Mr. Brent, which I'd obtained legally through a third-party witness. In it, Karen clearly said, "You know this is political, just sign the form. Or I bring up your 2015 permit violations and let Lansing eat you alive." The judge leaned back like she'd just been slapped. "Mr. Manson," she said, "do you have anything else?" "Yes," I said calmly. I'd like to submit evidence of coordinated defamation via HOA forums, including IP tracking that links posts falsely accusing me of fraud and theft to the HOA board secretary's home router. The court reporter blinked twice. Karen's attorney looked ready to vomit. Defense rests, I said. There was no rebuttal. What could they say? That I wasn't supposed to fight back? Judge Carroll took a brief recess. When she returned, her decision was swift. This court finds that Lakeview Pines HOA acted beyond its legal boundaries, submitted fraudulent materials, attempted to manipulate zoning processes through intimidation and nepotism, and pursued a meritless claim under the guise of community governance. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. She turned her eyes to Karen. And if further investigation confirms criminal activity, you may want to familiarize yourself with state prison maps. Court adjourned. As I walked out, reporters swarmed the hallway. I ignored them. I had nothing left to say. Let the evidence do the talking. Outside, I spotted Evan standing by the courthouse steps. He looked pale, anxious, like a man waiting for the ground to eat him. "You still working for her?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." Good, because Karen was about to find out what losing everything really looked like. The fall of Karen Landry didn't happen with one final bang in a courtroom. That would have been too clean, too merciful. No, her collapse unfolded like a slow-motion demolition. You could hear the metal groaning before the building even started to drop. And I had front-row seats with popcorn made of spite. 3 days after the trial, a black SUV with county plates rolled through the gates of Lakeview Pines. It parked in front of their community office, the cute little faux Victorian structure near the welcome sign with Pines, written in cursive like it was a damn spa. Except spas don't usually get raided by investigators from the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. They walked in with clipboards, walked out with boxes, hard drives, laptops, file cabinets, phones. I watched from my dock, coffee in hand, wondering whether Karen had prepped her staff for the phrase sealed warrant. That night, Evan called. I let it ring once before answering. No greeting. "I want to talk," he said quietly. "Meet me at the old boathouse," I replied. "No cell phones." He showed up looking like a man halfway through a panic attack and dressed like a substitute teacher, plaid shirt tucked into jeans, expression of a deer realizing the headlights aren't slowing down. "Okay," he said, sitting across from me on a broken bench. "You were right." "I usually am," I said. "Be specific." "I started helping Karen 6 months ago. She told me the HOA had permission to annex some surrounding properties, said it was just cleaning up the old maps, administrative stuff. And you believe that?" He rubbed his face. "I was broke, coming off a bad divorce. She offered me a consulting fee, said I could help make things run smoother, said I'd be protecting community integrity. But then I started noticing things." "What things?" "She forged meeting notes, had the vice president sign off on fake votes, changed minutes retroactively, pushed retroactive fines onto old residents until they either moved or paid. Some of them were too scared to fight. And you stayed on board because I thought I could steer it from the inside." He looked up ashamed. "Then she sent me to you." "To check in," I said flatly. He nodded. "But I couldn't find anything on you. So she told me to plant something, a violation notice. I didn't do it. That's when I backed off. She got someone else." I could already guess who. "She's finished," Evan said. "Not yet." I handed him a flash drive. "What's this?" "The full IP logs from the HOA's forum activity, metadata, admin access, login timestamps. You give that to the county investigators, and you don't just clear your name. You help sink the ship." He stared at it. "Why help me?" "Because you're not the monster," I said. "Just a man who fed one for too long." He didn't reply, but he took the drive and left. I had no idea if he'd go through with it, but he did. 2 days later, the Michigan Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation into the Lakeview Pines HOA board. A second SUV showed up. This time, they brought federal oversight. Emails between Karen and the zoning official, threats, bribes, and pressure campaigns surfaced through anonymous leaks. Apparently, Karen had been blackmailing 3 officials across 2 counties, all of it wrapped in HOA letterhead, like a bad mafia movie with pastels and potted plants. Residents started resigning from the board. The treasurer posted a public letter on the HOA's site, which someone immediately archived because we live in the age of receipts. He admitted that Karen had pressured them all into compliance by threatening their reputations and homes. Some had caved, others had left quietly, but they all knew. It didn't stop there. Local news ran a piece titled, "Queen of the Pines, How One HOA Tried to Seize the Shoreline." It included footage from my cameras, interview snippets from the courtroom, and a soundbite of me saying, "Property isn't just land, it's freedom dressed in dirt and taxes." It went viral. Suddenly, I was the poster child for every disgruntled homeowner who ever got fined for painting their mailbox the wrong shade of tan. Petitions started, not against me, but demanding dissolution of the HOA. Dozens of Lakeview Pines residents, previously afraid of Karen, now marched into town halls with signatures citing malicious governance, fraudulent financials, and attempted land seizure. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Karen, though, she broke. News crews caught her outside her home, shrieking at a county official with mascara smeared and blouse half untucked. She called it a witch hunt, claimed the documents were doctored, that I had hacked her HOA. Then the reporter pulled out a printed copy of her own email with the words, "If we can't get him to pay, we'll bury him in procedure until he gives up the house." She slapped the camera. The arrest came quietly later that week. No sirens, no cuffs in public, just a knock, a statement, and the slow descent of a woman who'd tried to run a kingdom without realizing she lived in a republic. The charges: wire fraud, document forgery, zoning manipulation, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Evan testified. So did the zoning official she'd blackmailed. So did I. She was denied bail. I passed her on the courthouse steps once briefly. She looked at me like I'd killed her dog. I just tipped my hat. I wasn't angry anymore. She had taken her shot. I had returned fire with interest. By the time summer rolled in, the sign at the front of Lakeview Pines had been spray painted 3 times. The first was just the word liars. The second was more artistic, a crude drawing of a $ strangling a pine tree. The third was my personal favorite, HOA. Hostile Occupation Army. I didn't do it, but I sure as hell took a picture. The dissolution hearings began in mid-June, not in a courtroom this time, but in the town's administrative building, an old red brick structure that smelled like nostalgia and unfiled paperwork. The county convened a special review panel to examine whether Lakeview Pines HOA had violated its charter to a degree that warranted forced disbandment. They didn't even bother with the usual neutral tone. The agenda said, in bold print, "Emergency Oversight Review. Allegations of fraudulent governance." The hearing was supposed to be administrative. It turned into theater. Residents who had kept their mouths shut for years suddenly lined up with binders. One woman, Debbie Witherspoon, former HOA secretary, brought a literal suitcase full of printed emails and meeting minutes. She placed it on the table like it was a corpse she'd decided to exhume. "I was scared of her," Debbie said. "Karen made us believe we had no choice, that if we questioned her, she'd find a way to fine us, ruin us." She said, and I quote, "Nobody cares about paperwork until you're bleeding on it." Someone gasped. Another person clapped. A man named Rage, a soft-spoken engineer who'd moved in 4 years ago, explained how he was charged special maintenance dues for a security gate that never got installed. Then came Beth, a mother of 2 who broke down crying while reading an email from Karen threatening to revoke community pool access for her kids unless she stopped asking about board elections. By the end of the second day, the panel chair, a bald guy with a voice like a disappointed uncle, looked like he needed a drink and a nap. They voted unanimously to begin formal dissolution. Lakeview Pines HOA was placed under temporary administrative receivership. That meant no more fines, no more enforcements, no more community guidelines enforced like federal law by women in pastel polo shirts. A third-party auditor was brought in to review the HOA's books. That's when it got real ugly. Over $140,000 in emergency legal fund fees had been quietly pulled from the HOA reserve over the last 3 years, all linked to a single off-the-books account, accessible only by Karen and her vice president brother, Ben Landry. Turns out the Landrys were pulling a long con, targeting borderline properties like mine, threatening them into compliance, and then redirecting the payments through creative bookkeeping into personal accounts or shell firms they controlled. 3 homeowners, now retired, had paid nearly $25,000 each just to avoid litigation. Most of them never fought, just sold, moved away. They'd tried to do the same to me. They failed. The county froze HOA assets immediately. Civil suits started rolling in from within the community itself. Half the board took plea deals in exchange for testimony. Ben Landry skipped town, last seen in New Mexico, but the feds were already sniffing around. And Karen. She refused to speak. Not in court, not to the press, not to her own family. She just sat there, lips pursed, eyes vacant. The Queen of Pines, dethroned, defunded, and about to be convicted of multiple federal crimes. It felt hollow. I thought I'd feel victorious, triumphant. But honestly, it was like watching a fire finally burn out and realizing the smoke had been inside your lungs all along. I didn't win. I just survived. Still, there were perks to survival. My lawyer, Liz, helped file a civil counterclaim for emotional distress, property defamation, and attempted fraudulent seizure. With the HOA's insurance policies now in limbo, the judge approved an expedited mediation. I walked away with a settlement of $250,000. Clean. Taxed, yes. But still enough to fix up the cabin, repair the dock, and maybe even add a new boathouse if I felt fancy. They offered me the check with a non-disclosure agreement stapled to it. I tore the NDA in half and handed it back. Put it in the public record, I said. Every word. The clerk blinked. That's highly irregular. So was being stalked by a fake inspector at 2 in the morning. He nodded and filed it. A week later, a local podcast ran an episode called The HOA That Ate Itself. They interviewed me on the dock. I wore the same hoodie I had the day I got sued, just with fewer holes. When they asked me what I'd do now, I just pointed to the lake. Swim, read, live, maybe fish if they're biting. Anything you want to say to the people who tried to take your home? I thought about it for a second. Then I said, next time, pick someone who doesn't read fine print for sport. July rolled in thick and warm, the kind of Michigan summer that sticks to your skin and slows time to a crawl. The lake was still, almost unnaturally so, as if it, too, was exhausted from the last few months of battles, hearings, and humiliations. But I welcomed the stillness. After everything, it felt earned. I rebuilt the dock by hand, tore off the warped boards, sanded the old supports, replaced rusted bolts, and sealed the new planks with the same waterproofing my grandfather swore by. It was quiet work, satisfying, the kind of task that doesn't require a second opinion or legal argument. The lake didn't care about zoning. The trees didn't ask for compliance forms. The birds never once demanded dues. It had been 2 weeks since Karen was sentenced, 6 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 4. The courtroom had been packed with reporters and residents, most of whom were still adjusting to a life without pastel-colored tyranny. Karen said nothing at sentencing, just stared ahead like she was watching the last broadcast of a show that had once starred her. Ben Landry was still missing. Last rumor had him hiding out in Arizona, growing a beard and using an alias so thin it probably flapped in the wind. I didn't care if they found him. The damage was done, and now he got to live in the shadow of his sister's fall. The Lakeview Pines HOA no longer existed. The state had revoked its charter and ordered the community to restructure under voluntary civic management. The residents were free. Their fear had become shame, and shame became action. They planted new gardens, held meetings with actual votes. Some even came by with awkward gifts: banana bread, homemade jam, a bottle of bourbon that tasted like forgiveness, aged in oak and poor judgment. Evan stopped by one morning. He stood at the edge of the rebuilt dock, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. "You staying here for good?" he asked. "Wasn't planning on moving," I said. "Not after all the trouble I caused just by existing." He gave a short laugh. "You were right, about everything." "I usually am." He smiled, then turned serious. "Thanks for not throwing me under the bus." I thought about it. "Yeah, I deserved it." "But you made a choice," I said. "Late, sure, but you flipped the switch when it mattered." He nodded, and we stood there in silence. Two men who'd seen what community rot looked like up close and personal. He eventually said goodbye and walked back toward what used to be Karen's little empire. I heard rumors someone might turn the old HOA office into a community center. Someone else said they'd burn it down and put in a dog park. Either option worked for me. I spent the next week clearing brush on the far edge of the property. That's when I found the old canoe Grandpa had stashed years ago, half buried under vines and spiders big enough to run for office. I dragged it out, patched the holes, sanded it down, and set it afloat one warm afternoon. Paddling out to the middle of the lake, I looked back at the shoreline. My shoreline, untouched, quiet, mine. Everything that mattered stood intact. My land, my name, my peace. They had come for all of it, with fake maps, broken laws, and forced smiles. But the funny thing about pressure is, it reveals what people are really made of. Karen was all control and no spine. Evan had a conscience, eventually. And me? I didn't come here to fight, but I did. Not because I wanted to win, because I wasn't going to let anyone redraw the lines my grandfather staked into this earth with his hands and a hammer. As the sun dipped below the trees, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old tin badge my granddad used to keep on the cabin wall. It was just a novelty thing. Unofficial sheriff of Lake Orion. I'd always laughed at it. Now I pinned it to the inside of my flannel. I smiled to myself and leaned back in the canoe, letting the silence wash over me, deep and still. And this time, no one dared interrupt it.